There's a lot, this case is incredibly complex, and one of the reasons that there's so much to go over is that Kevin's case, I believe, is the most important death penalty case in California. And I believe it is one of the most important cases in the entire country. Kevin isn't a political prisoner like Mumia, but Kevin's case is very important because it threatens to expose an incredible police frame-up. The movement around Kevin's case threatens to expose the way the state employs the use of science, like DNA, against innocent victims. Kevin's case is a complete symbol of this sort of deceitful way that the state uses these things against us. Legally speaking, right now, Kevin Cooper is in a lot of trouble. He is in a lot of trouble. On May 11th, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a decision against Kevin. He had a petition in the Ninth Circuit asking for a rehearing in front of a full trial that's called an en banc hearing, and he was denied. What that means right now is that Kevin's final option in the courts is to be heard in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And legally speaking, his chances of getting a hearing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court are very slim. I think it's something like 98% of all cases death penalty cases that reach the U.S. Supreme Court are not heard. But following in the tradition of the Kevin Cooper case, which is that emotions run high, the Ninth Circuit issued its decision, and the decision against him was just a few pages long, and then the rest of the courts issued this dissenting decision. It's 114 pages of complete details of the frame-up of Kevin Cooper. And it is an incredibly powerful piece. And I want to read bits and pieces of it to you today. I usually don't like to read things word for word to people, but I think to wrap your head around the scope of this frame-up, I kind of want to do that. So stick with me today, okay? Judge Fletcher, who wrote the dissent, one of the major dissents, actually opened it with the words, "The state of California may be about to execute an innocent man." And those are pretty powerful words for a judge. Let me go into this. Let's see. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the case of Kevin Cooper, or those who need a refresher course, I'll kind of go over what happened. In the summer of 1983, in June of 1983, a family named the Ryan family, they were horse ranchers in San Bernardino County, California. It was in Chino Hills. Wealthy horse ranching area. They had a little friend over, a little 10-year-old boy was staying at the house. There was a little boy, a little girl, and their friend. And sometime in the middle of the night, this family was hacked to death. And it was one of the most brutal crimes California has ever seen. It was horrifying. The autopsy reports say that, I don't know how many wounds there were inflicted. I mean, people were mutilated. And the autopsy report says that this all happened within a minute and a half with 3 different weapons. There was an axe, a hatchet, and an ice pick. The police automatically knew that they were probably looking for 3 people, obviously more than 1 people. And what was so special about this case is that 1 person survived. It was a little 9-year-old boy named Josh Ryan. And Josh told the doctors, the police, and a psychiatrist that 3 white men chased his family around the house and killed them. These were his words. And when he saw photos of Kevin Cooper on television, he said, that wasn't the guy who killed my family. So it's important. Years later, after years and years of talking to the prosecution, he's changed his story 3 times. Later, when he was maybe 12 or 13 years old, he said that, well, I don't know who did it, but I did see an outline of a person, and he had a big afro. What's interesting, though, that we know now is that Kevin Cooper at the time did have a big afro, but he had it braided at that time. So there goes that idea. So then later on, now Josh says he knows that it was Kevin Cooper, but that's what the police do. The prosecution was able to get Kevin Cooper because Kevin was a petty thief. Non-violent, he would steal things, though. If it wasn't nailed down, Kevin would probably take it back in his youth. He was in jail in the California Institute for Men, in the Chino Hills area, and he decided, unfortunately, about 2 days before these murders happened, really bad timing on Kevin's case, that he would just walk away. It wasn't like there was a great prison break. Kevin literally just walked away. They called it a prison without walls. And he walked away, walked across the field, and stayed in a house. He found a house in the area that was vacant. Some horse ranchers owned the place. It was unfortunately right next door to the Ryan home. There was a phone there, there was a bed. Kevin was able to make some phone calls to some friends to try to get some money, and then he got out of the area. But after the murders happened, unfortunately, the police got word that this black man had escaped from prison, was in the area, and the largest manhunt in California history up to that time started for Kevin Cooper. And this was the part, the area of the case that you can actually see evidence being manipulated and created to get Kevin Cooper. They had to get somebody because the passion around this case was so high. People were freaking out in Chino Hills because they thought that there were 3 guys going to break into their house and hack people to death. So the police had to get someone, and they got Kevin Cooper. They really didn't have any evidence, like I said, against Kevin, but one piece of evidence that they claimed they had was the prosecution said that there was a bloody shoe print found on a bed sheet in the scene. Interestingly, though, investigators didn't find this shoe print at the scene. They found it in the lab. And this shoe print doesn't show up in any of the crime scene photographs, but interestingly enough, they were like, well, hey, look, we have this sheet in the lab and there's a bloody shoe print on it. And that's how Kevin's investigation goes. But the prosecution claimed that this shoe print came from a shoe called a Pro Keds Dude tennis shoe, which they claimed was manufactured in the prison where Kevin was staying, and that it was issued only to inmates, and that Kevin had this exact shoe in this exact size. But listen to this dissent, and this is where I'm going to go word for word, so bear with me. The dissent actually lays this out. It says, Midge Carroll, the now retired warden of the prison, provided a sworn declaration in which she stated that she had learned from her staff that shoes issued to prisoners were not prison manufactured or specially designated prison issue shoes, but rather were common tennis shoes available to the general public through Sears and Roebuck and other such retail stores. Carroll stated that she had learned this information during the investigation and conveyed it to the investigators before the trial. This information would have been critical to Cooper's defense, for a key to the prosecution's case at trial was that identical shoe prints at the crime scene and in the house where Cooper had been staying were made by Pro Keds Dude tennis shoes, and that these shoes were distributed only to prisoners and other institutions. Warden Carroll's information, though clearly exculpatory, had not been provided to Cooper prior to the trial. So the jury heard that this was Kevin's shoe print, same size, same shoes Kevin had. But what they didn't know was that Kevin actually didn't have those shoes. Those shoes were available to the public, and one person that did have those shoes was the guy that was running the lab at the time. This guy who was running the lab at the time was later fired for stealing 5 pounds of heroin to sell and to use. He later admitted that he was an addict, a heroin addict, during the time of the Kevin Cooper investigation, which he was heading up the lab work. And he had that same pair of shoes in his lab in the exact same size. Kevin did not have them. And an inmate at the prison where Kevin had been staying who did the issuing of shoes even had a declaration that said Kevin Cooper never had those shoes. So this is where the Kevin Cooper prosecution, starts to invent things, and this is just incredible. Another piece of so-called evidence that has been used against Kevin is a beige T-shirt that was found near on the side of the road, and it was near a bar that was near the crime scene. This T-shirt was spattered in blood, and early testing of the T-shirt, of the blood stains, proved that it was the blood of one of the victims. They did thorough testing on it, and they found no blood on it that was consistent with Kevin Cooper's. Of course, this was before DNA, but they found nothing on this that was consistent with Kevin Cooper.